I want to read to you a very familiar text, Romans 8:28. We know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to His purpose. Shall we pray? Father, I pray that as we talk and just reminisce a little bit, and take a little walk down memory lane, that you will be honored and not us by any means, Father. I thank you for hearing us. I thank you, Lord, that this dear lady is well enough to come back and to be here, and we just thank you for that. Pray that you'll continue to be with each one here. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, the big question that might come to you is, how in the world did a boy from Texas end up in New England? I asked myself that a few times. But I will tell you that we acclimated quickly to this part of the world. Now, I'll tell you how we got here. I was at Andrews University. I had a bunch of, at least a dozen, I know there was more than that, letters from the Texas Conference president saying, we are going to call you to our conference when you graduate. I guess somehow I would see him when he came to the campus, but I just never kept him up to date. And finally, he called 5 young ministers one year, and it was the year I was to graduate, and he used all 5 of his intern positions, and I said, well, what about me? He said, I didn't know you were graduating this year. And I believe he was honest in that. One of the other students had mistakenly thought that I was graduating another year, the next year. But we had jammed things together. Camille and I had taken summer school, everything, because when we transferred from Southwestern to Andrews, I lost a lot of hours in the transfer. Shouldn't have happened in the Adventist system, did happen. And so I had to take a lot of extra credits and in order to make it, but I had made it, and I was going to graduate. But somehow the word didn't reach the president. So I didn't have a call. And quite honestly, I was very discouraged because I'd looked forward to going there, to working with that particular president. A man by the name of Ben Leach, who was the president of the Texas Conference at the time. He had been pastor of Worcester years ago. He was a man that was well known out in this part of the world. At Providence, he was at Providence. And now he was the president in Texas. So immediately I told my professors, I had been telling them all along, I have a call, don't put my name in. But then I told them, go ahead and put my name in. There was a young man during there at the school that was very outspoken. His name was Merlin Mills. Young Merlin Mills, he was a year or so behind me in school, 2 years actually, was from New England. His father was the president of the Southern New England Conference. His father's name was Merle. His name was Merlin. Merlin was very athletic. I was involved in athletics. And I heard that Merlin had made a disparaging remark about the ministerial students. He said they were all a bunch of pansies, which meant a bunch of softies. So when we got out there playing flag football, every chance I got, Merlin was on the other side. I hit him as hard as I could and knocked him to the ground. And I'd push his face in the dirt and I'd say, you preachers are a bunch of pansies. And he would get so angry, because he was a ministerial student. He would get so angry. And every chance I got, I hit him. I mean, hit him. I mean, legally, but semi-legally, put it that way. And we gained a great deal of respect for each other. I never told him I was a minister or a ministerial student. A few days later, after that one encounter, I saw him in the hall. When I'd see him in the hall the day or two before, I'd hit him in the hall. I'd bump him like that, a bunch of pansy preachers, and walk on. And he walked up to me and he said, I understand you're a ministerial student. I said, that's right. And I said, I resent what I heard you said. Well, he said, there are some exceptions. He said, did you know that my father is a conference president? I said, I would have thought your father was an atheist. Those were my exact words. I said, I had no idea he was a conference president. He said, he's coming to this campus and he's looking for preachers. Would you talk with him? I said, where is he from? He said, New England. I said, no way. I said, listen, I've had enough snow and ice here. And by the way, if you've lived here, you've had enough experience. You can handle Michigan. But if you're living in Texas, where you see snow about every 5 years, a little bit of snow that melts in a day, then I wasn't ready for the North. And I said, there's no way. I'm not about to. He said, would you please talk with my father? I said, no, it's a waste of time, his time and mine. He said, but I've got to line up some people, and all you do is talk to him, and then it doesn't matter. If you say no to him, that's fine. I don't care. But please talk to him. I said, all right, I'll talk to him. Elder Mills came to interview, and he took me into a room, and we had a nice visit together, and I really liked him. I had also interviewed with the Michigan Conference president, Elder N.C. Wilson, the grandfather of the current president of the General Conference. The father of the president of the General Conference now was at that time in North American Division president, but he was not yet along the line as far as he later became GC president. But his father, Ted Wilson, now's grandfather, had been a division president of several divisions and had barely missed being General Conference president. Now, I really liked him, and I felt like I would enjoy working with him. He said, we will get you a letter, a call. I didn't want to work in Michigan particularly, but, you go where the Lord calls you. And so then Elder Mills came, and then Mills told me, he said, I want to visit with your wife. He came to our house. He said, I never call a man without visiting with his wife. When he met my wife, that sealed it. He wanted me to come. He forgave me for being rough around the edges because he liked my wife. And so I said, well, if we're going to go wherever the Lord calls us first. The first call came to southern New England, and it beat the call from Michigan about a week. This committee met first. Elder Mills fired a letter off to us, and when we got that, we said, Lord, if that's where you want us to go, that's where we're going. When the letter came from Michigan, it was late, and we'd already accepted the call to southern New England. Never forget when we drove in here, folks. Folks, y'all talk funny. You know that, don't you? We don't, but y'all do, And when I drove into Worcester, I asked somebody where Worcester was. They said, what'd you say? I said, Worcester. They looked at me and said, we never heard of that place. Finally, I pointed it on the map. Oh, Worcester. Yeah, we know where Worcester is. Yeah, you just go on down Route 12 here and Route 20 and so forth. And oh, yeah, you'll find it. It's right there. Then we got down there, and I started looking for Leominster. And I said, where's Leominster? And they said, what? And I got out of the car. I said, well, I'm going to a place called South Lancaster, but it's close to this town, Leominster. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's, and they told me where that was. I got back in the car, and I'll never forget. I said, Camille, we'll be all right here once we learn the language. And as I said, these people do not speak English like we understand English. It's different. We went to South Lancaster, and we fell in love with the people of New England right away. We loved them. You know, I'm very outspoken. I'm sorry, I was born that way, got me in trouble all the way through life, school and everywhere else. But I got to New England, I found out these people are as outspoken as I was. That's all right. We got along together with each other. We told each other exactly what we were thinking. You didn't have to guess what we were thinking. And so I got along with the New Englanders very well. Loved them. Well, we were there 2 weeks. 2 weeks. And Merlin Mills was killed in an automobile accident on the way back to Andrews. One of his good friends and the son of one of our good friends was driving the car. Mrs. Mills was asleep in the back. Merlin was asleep in the passenger's front end. And this boy, the truck that he was passing on the interstate was driving slower than he thought. And as he moved to go around it, the car hit. And it killed Merlin. He lived a few hours, but he died. We had his funeral. Elder Mills. Merlin had been a little bit of a renegade at school, and Elder Mills said, look, you've gotten to know him, and you know that he loved the Lord. And I said, yes, Elder Mills, I do know that he loved the Lord, because we'd had some good, serious talks. Being the conference president's son wasn't all that easy in South Lancaster, and sometimes he was trying to be tough or talk tough, act tough, so that people wouldn't think that he was the conference president's son and maybe he was a pansy, you know, so to speak. And so I gave a testimony at the funeral. That was a difficult funeral for everybody, especially the Mills family. Their 2 sons, Merlin and his brother, who later became a physician. Elder Mills, by the way, went on to leave here, Southern New England, become president of the Trans-African Division, then on as the vice president of the General Conference. Great man, wonderful man, dedicated man. Amazing thing about him, I talked to some people that were with him in Africa, and they said, you know, one preacher told me, he said, I have slept with him in mud huts without even any mosquito netting. Never was sick, never had malaria. Came home, Loma Linda, California, bitten by a West Nile mosquito and died a few years ago. Perfect health. Killed by a mosquito in Loma Linda, California, after having survived all those things out there in the mission field. Isn't that something? It was. Anyway, Elder Mills had made a deal with me. He said, if you'll come out of college, come to South Lancaster and be the associate pastor, we will count even the year that you go back to seminary. I want you to come out 1 year, then go back to seminary. We will count that towards your ordination, because I didn't want to necessarily move twice. But he said, you know, if you'll do this, it'll help us out. We've got to have an associate pastor at South Lancaster Village. And I said, fine, I'll do it. We moved out there, moved in a little place on Parker Road. And there we worked with Russell Adams, who was the senior pastor of the South Lancaster Village Church. I used to thank God that I had the opportunity to work a year with Russell Adams. He was an absolute masterful pastor in every way. Great preacher. I could sit and listen to him preach all day long. He was a great counselor. He taught me a lot of different things about board meetings and a lot of different things. He gave me a lot of latitude as a young man. There was a little group meeting up at Leominster of Italians. They met in had an Italian Sabbath school class. Brother Lombard was the head of that, and there were 5 or 6 ladies there. He turned that over to me. He said, do whatever you want. So I went up there and I said, let's start a church instead of just this little Sabbath school thing you've got. And they were meeting in a Grange hall with cigarette butts on the floor. You know, it was a different day in those days. People smoked everywhere. I just praise God that there's a little freedom of air now that we didn't have on airplanes or anywhere else. I had a good friend that used to get on the plane. People would smoke even when the plane was taking off in those days. You've forgotten it. I haven't, because I got a headache every time I got on the plane. And this fellow would get on, and he'd hand a person a card. And the card said, if you won't smoke, I won't chew. If you won't blow smoke on me, I won't spit on you. He didn't have too many people smoke next to him, but anywhere on the plane, you'd come off the plane just like that. Well, even that Grange Hall where we had church smelled horrible. And so I said to Pastor Russ Adams, I said, we want to see if we can find a church and start a church. Oh, he said, the problem is that after you leave, they probably won't give me another associate. I said, oh, they'll give you another one. He said, now that'll give me 2 churches. I said, well, I think the Lord really wants a church up there. He said, if you can find a place to rent, I'll go along with you. Because he was pretty well sure there wasn't anything to rent up there. So there was a Assembly of God church, an English church. It was on the road between Leominster and Fitchburg, but that particular church only had parking on Sunday because the stores next to it were closed on Sunday and people would park there. But on Sabbath, there was no place to park. You'd have to park up in the residential area behind it. But I thought that's the only place in town, so I called the pastor. I said, would you like to rent your church? He said, which one? I said, you mean you've got more than one? He said, we just closed our Italian congregation. I said, where's that? He said, it's on Cross Street. And I said, let me drive by. I drove by and called him back and said, I'd like to see it. And we rented that church. It's the Spanish Seventh-day Adventist church now, I understand, in Leominster. But that's where we started the Leominster congregation. I held a meeting there with Milton Halleck, and the Lord blessed, gave us some baptisms. We organized the church with 50 members, that organized church, and that church continued to really blossom, and the Lord blessed it. I think they built a new place after that, and at that particular time, I was able to give a little gift to the church and of a sound system for that particular congregation. But anyway, that was our beginning of our work here in southern New England. And then we went back to the seminary to finish up that year at the seminary. And then back. When we finished the seminary, Don Jacobson asked me to join him for an evangelistic crusade in Racine, Wisconsin. And I was his music director and helped him with the field school. Then he and I together came to Worcester, and I pronounce it pretty good now, don't I? At least I don't call it Worcester anymore. And we came to Worcester, and we held a field school with Bruce Johnston there. It was Pentecost. The Lord just poured out unbelievable things in those meetings. And I was excited about it. Then there was a meeting right after that with HMS Richards Jr., and they asked me to go and be the music director for that So I'm going from one meeting to another meeting, and was the music director for a meeting in the Saxon Theater in Fitchburg, Massachusetts with H.M.S. Richards Jr. Del Delker was our soloist. I did the song directing. We had the King's Herald some nights when they were able to be with us. And Elder Richards Sr. even came by one night. And we had a tremendous meeting. The Lord blessed. And I was all fired up for meetings. And I knew I was coming here to be pastor. And I said, you know, as I was talking with different ones, and I think it was actually Don Jacobson's idea, he said the best time to hold an evangelistic meeting, if you're the pastor holding the meeting, is immediately when you get there. Because after you're there for a while, they're so sick of hearing you preach, they won't come hear you. And I said, you know, I like that idea. Start it off with a bang. Start it off with an evangelistic meeting. And so I came here to meet with the board. Now, I wasn't down here yet as pastor. I was coming, but I knew I had to order some advertising. I had to get some things going. I was going to put up a big billboard here in town, a 24 sheet. We did. By the way, we got that put up free. All we paid for is what they call a posting fee, which is like $20. That's all it was. We got the space free. You see, right after the automobile dealerships would go out in those days, the old paper signs, they used to have those billboards. They build these great mammoth ones now that are more than what they call a 24 sheet is what the others were. So they're a little different now, and I've gotten them free now, but it costs you about $1,000 to get it painted today. So it's a whole different situation. We got a billboard here in town. We didn't have it yet because I had come to the board to get them to vote to hold a meeting. And I asked, I said, I want to start off here with a meeting. They said no. I said, what's that? I thought they'd say, wow, let's do it. They said no. And I said, but wait a minute. I came here to hold a meeting. And somebody said, Pastor, we're not holding a meeting this fall. Maybe sometime. I said, they said, we need time to get prepared for the meeting. I said, listen, I want to slip up on the devil. I want to do it before he even knows we're in town. And I want to come in here quick, start a meeting, and go for it. And they said, well, she said, no. And I said, well, I want to tell you, you've got the wrong pastor. I said, I'll call the office in the morning and tell them, send me someplace else. I'm not coming. Well, they said, now, wait a minute, don't be too hasty. I said, no, I came here to hold meetings. I came here to do evangelism. And if you're not going to do it, they said, well, and then we did some negotiation. See, I had really started out first wanting to run every night for 3 weeks. Then they said, why don't you run just the weekends? And I said, no, you don't get enough continuity. Finally, I did make a concession, and I said, we'll run Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Wednesday. Didn't want to do it. I wanted to at least run Tuesday and Wednesday, but you know, you have to negotiate. And they said yes. Now I'm going to tell you, you remember the Bible, the servant that said that they would go and didn't, and the one that said they wouldn't go and did? This church never supported anybody better than they did me in those meetings. I want to tell you that. Every single one of them, and especially the one that said no. Complete support. Now, she and I used to lock horns a lot. But you know, when it was all over with, she stood with me all the way. All the way. And we had some real problems at times, but the Lord saw us through it. I believe we baptized 17 in that meeting. I believe we did. It may have been a few less, and some of you may have been baptized. Was anybody here baptized in that meeting? Because if you moved, we'd baptize you. I mean, you know. I mean, some of you young fellows, young people might have been baptized at that time. But we baptized. The Lord blessed. He really did. At the end of 9 months, we had, I believe, 93 members here. We started with 45, 46, somewhere in that neighborhood. But the Lord really, really blessed our meetings together. One of the things that happened here that was an inspiration was the pastor that had been the pastor of this particular church. His name was Jim Davis. Jim Davis was the pastor of the Methodist Church, which they had been meeting here, sold us this church. They built a new church. Jim Davis was a pusher. He was a mover and a shaker, like you wouldn't believe. In addition to being pastor of the Methodist Church and being head of the Ministerial Association, he was mayor of the city of Plainville. He was the man. Every Sabbath, he would sit right on the back row, right back there. He'd come to church and be here with us. And we got very well acquainted. Rudy Cloutier was a colporteur that was here and was one of the elders. And Rudy knocked on his door. He didn't know whose door he was knocking on. Jim bought every Adventist book that Rudy had was sold. Jim knows our teachings. Jim said one day to me, "Come on, I want you to join the Ministerial Association." When I got to the Ministerial Association, they weren't too glad to see me, because we had been holding meetings. I'd baptized several members of some of their churches, and they took me on. I'm not kidding you. I don't think Jim knew what was going to happen, or if he did, he sure didn't warn me. I was so fortunate. I said, "Well, let me tell you something. I have a list of our membership here that's not attending currently." And I had typed several copies of it. I was going to give it to some of the elders and ask them to go see these people and visit. I handed them instead to these pastors. I said, "You go get these people into your church." I said, "You've got people that weren't attending your church. They came to our church, and we invited them, and they feel at home there. And they loved the message." But I said, "If you go get these people, these are not attending my church. These are non-attending members of our church right now. Go get them into your church." Now, I'm going to tell you the truth. I knew Adventists either go to our church or they don't go to another church. You know that. I'm sorry. I was being a little bit sneaky there. But one of them looked at me and said, "Yeah, but you didn't get people that weren't just not attending our church." He said, "You've baptized some of my best members." I said, "Well, we want them to be happy wherever they are." I said, "You do too." Those guys, we became friends. I preached in Jim's church several times. Whenever Jim was gone, he would have me cover his pulpit. And some of the other men did too. The congregational pastor here did. The Baptist pastor did. I've preached in those churches. Let me tell you something nice about that. They'd give you a little honorarium. They'd give you $50. That's a lot of money in those days. It's almost as much as I made in a week. And they would give it to you. And I accepted it and enjoyed it and appreciated it and thanked them for it and said, "Look, let me know if you need a preacher another time. I'm always ready." And so we had a pretty good relationship with Jim Davis. Jim Davis, when he left here, went to Yale University to be the pastor of the Methodist campus Methodist church there. I don't know whatever happened to him after that, but I want to tell you, I'll never forget him and never forget his warmth, his welcome to me here in Plainville, and the fact that, and by the way, Jim, after I preached at Jim's church, some of his members started coming over here. And he'd come in and he'd say, "Jim, I saw 6 or 7 of my members over over here this morning. And I'd asked him, well, Jim, how come you're coming? He said, you know, I don't start on my sermon until Saturday morning for Sunday service. This gets me ready to start studying. I come, he said, I'm running the town as mayor and I'm doing all this stuff. And he said, I start to focus spiritually by coming and sitting through a worship service with you guys. And then I head right to my study and I'm ready to put my message together for the week. So interesting person. We wanted to do something on radio. You know, as a young preacher, you're just out trying to do everything. And so I went down to the radio station, and they said, we don't have any time for that, but we'll let you do some devotionals. So I started off doing just some devotionals. And then one day they said to me, you know, these devotionals, they were only like 1 minute, but they gave those, they may have been a little longer than that, but they gave those to on a rotating basis to different pastors in town. They said, you know, if you want to do a radio program, we'll do one with you. So I said, wow, that would be great. Now, some of you will probably remember Brother Lawson down at Meriden. Brother Lawson had bought a professional Ampex recorder. I mean, this is a big league recorder. This was as good as they had at the radio station. And he had it in his basement. And somehow I saw it, and he showed it to me, and I said, I wish you would let me do my radio programs on there because I really don't like to do them at the radio station. There's so much activity going on around there. So they'll give me a little studio to do them in, but I really wish I could do them over here. He said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll leave. You let me know what days you're coming. I will leave my basement unlocked. You go in. You do it. There won't be anybody around. We'll be at work. And then he said, you do your radio program, and that'll be it. So I would go in there. I would preach so many minutes. Then I would take those tapes, and I would transport them, usually by car, down to Faith for Today. At that time, 3 of the members of the Faith for Today quartet were good friends. Jim Ripley, and there were 2 others that were pretty good friends, Stan Scheinbecker and Larry Fillingham. So I would go down there, Don Siebenlist was the other one, and I would go down there and take these tapes, and Jim Ripley would put Faith for Today quartet music on them. He would put a tag on the introduction, and then he would make the offer that we made. And it was a professionally sounding program. It really was. Jim was very good at editing, but whenever I'd make a mistake, we had a system. And when I'd make a mistake, I'd go like that. It'd make a pop. And then he would go in, and I would give instructions for how it ought to be edited, or I would just start over preaching. And that was kind of an industry standard way of doing it. Then he would tell me, now you listen to this completely all the way through. Make sure I didn't miss one of those pops. Well, one week, Camille's folks were coming. I had been listening on my little home Wallensack tape recorder. It was all reel to reel. I've been listening to the program, and she said, when you get down to the last song, turn it off. You will have listened to everything. Turn it off because that'll leave us something to listen to on Sunday that we haven't heard. So I said, okay. So we got down, and I finished down just to the last song, and I turned it off. That Sunday, my in-laws were there. My father-in-law, pastor of the Collegedale Seventh-day Adventist College Church, important man. And he's there, my mother-in-law. You know, you always try to impress your in-laws. And they're listening to the program, and I come down to the end. Now, I had stumbled a little bit in my prayer, and I made the prayer a little bit too long. And so there was a poem that I had put in, and I said, I remember that right after I said amen, I had turned it off, and then there was a that Jim had missed, and I had missed. And then I said, Jim, I'm going to do that prayer over. And if this is too long, cut that poem out, would you? And then I started praying again. And about that time, I want to tell you something. I knew there was nothing I could do. The reaction that I had was unbelievable. I ran and tried to dive under the couch, and that is the truth. Now, I was nowhere near as big as I am now, but there was no way I could get under that couch. We still have that couch, and there's no way I could have gotten under that couch. No, we don't still have that couch, do we? But there was no way I could have gotten under it. It was most embarrassing time of my life. The radio station turned it off. People started calling, wanting to know if I'd cracked up or what. We found out we did have some listeners. And they thought, what on earth happened to him? Because they had heard an edit that was not taken out. And so it was the most embarrassing. I cannot recall anything since that time. By the way, Brother Lawson had a daughter, Phyllis. She married Don Corkum. He was a student up at AUC. He was from Canada. And Don later became president of the Wisconsin Conference. They just retired last year from that particular situation. But she and I have talked about her dad, and she told me, she said, he never knew why he bought that recorder. He thought he might want to someday go on the radio, and he bought, this was an expensive Ampex professional recorder. I mean, they spent tons for that. It was a big upright, like you would see rack mounted at a radio station, and if a radio station had one like that, they would feel real lucky to do it. You know, I wanted to preach at all three churches. I think I mentioned that to you this morning. Now, there are always some elders that want to preach, and some of them are pretty good. But there are some of them that the members are praying will not preach. You know that. And so when I told the group what I wanted to do, they said, no way. You can't do it. I said, I've already timed it out. I will start out in Meriden, be there at 9 o'clock, be there earlier, visit with the people. Sometimes I think they even had like a little, some Danish or something like that. We had kind of like a, what do they call those breakfasts that, what, continental breakfast. And we'd have a little something like that and stand around, talk, and have a little bit of time together. Then I would leave there and go to Middletown, Portland, and preach there. By the time I got to Middletown, they usually were already in the preliminaries, and I would preach there at, we getting that service at 10:15. And then 11:30, I'd be here. As I mentioned this morning, you didn't hesitate. You had to move on to make it. But every week, the Lord helped me to make it. If there had been an accident or something along the way, I'm sure I'd have been late. But I wasn't. And we enjoyed that. And the continuity of people knowing their preacher was going to be there, that he was going to have a service, seemed to help our attendance. And it was a program that I recommend to young preachers even now. Saw a preacher the other day who really is one-upping me on this. I talked to him out in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Actually, Casper, Wyoming. He's not there, but he has a district with 9, count them, 9 churches. And he says, I preach at every one of them every Sabbath. I said, how do you do that? That's right. He is streaming his services, and he moves around to the different congregations, but he streams all of them to the other congregations. And he's doing that, and they've got good equipment, and it is really, really working, and he has a continuity of message that's going out to the people. I'll tell you, we're going to see some great things from some of these young preachers. And boy, that was exciting to me. I thought, man, if we'd had that kind of technology, that's what I'd have wanted to do. Something like that. Even though I want to be there to press the flesh, this streaming thing, that's got some real possibilities. Camille and I had to make some adjustments because actually I made more money going to school with my little business than I did being a pastor here. And I had sold the business, gotten rid of it, and the only income I had was what I made from Southern New England Conference. It wasn't a lot of money, folks, I guarantee you. My wife was a teacher. She taught the first year we were here. But when we had a child, Jimmy was born that June, we had made the decision that she would be a stay-at-home mom. She is a highly qualified teacher, but her class became our family for the next lot of years. And we're very proud of those kids. They are her work because she dedicated her whole life to them and to me and to my ministry. And I appreciate it so very much. But we were so broke early in our ministry here. First week, a month or two down here, we sat down, wrote our tithe check first. We believe in that. Set aside a little bit for offerings. Didn't have much to set aside. Paid all of our bills, and we had $8 left over and a child to feed the rest of the month. Now, you don't feed a kid the same way you can feed yourself. You got to buy special things for a child that's still on the bottle. $8. I said to Camille, this is wrong. This is wrong. In fact, I said, you think the Lord expects us to tithe? Now, see, I'm just talking out loud. How in the world do we tithe? We'd already written that tithe check. I want you to know, my wife always checks me whenever I ask a dumb question like that. She said, we don't rob God. We don't rob him. Boy, I said, how are we going to make it the rest of the whole month on $8? We got to buy gas. We got to cover all these areas. We got to, how are we going to make it? And you know what we did? We immediately got in the car and went for a drive. If you only got $8, you might as well go ahead and spend the gas up right then. We just went for a drive out through the New England countryside. And when we got back, it was dark. And there was a car sitting in front of our house. And we pulled up. We said, who is that? The man's name was Howard Lee. He was the rep for Worthington Foods. And Howard Lee knocked on our door, and he said, I came by here. I'm on my way down to New York City from South Lancaster. He said, I came by your house, and you were not here. I drove over to the Plainville church, thought you might be over there. You were not there. So he said, I drove back here. Now, if you knew Howard Lee, you know he's the most impatient person in the world. Absolute miracle that he would stop in the first place. Second miracle that he would come over here. Third miracle that he would come back to our house. I said, well, we're glad you came to see us, Howard. What brings you to see us? I was just wondering if y'all could use some food. what he said. I said, come in here, Howard. And I opened up the cupboards. There wasn't anything. I mean, a couple of little cans or something. Open up the fridge. There's not anything. I said, could we use some food? Yes, we could. We surely could. And he started unloading food. I said, what on earth ever possessed you to do that? I think he had some of the new things that they were fixing at that time, wanted us to try them out. I said, what on earth ever possessed you to do that? He said, I just felt impressed to come by. Lord, I said, I tell you, I don't cry easily. I hardly ever cry. But boy, tears welled up in my ears too, but in my eyes. I got tears in my ears from lying on my back, crying over you. You know? But anyway, what an experience. You know, we never ask anybody for anything. Amazing thing is, people normally have never given me anything because they always looked like I had everything. Even when I didn't have anything, they thought I did. I didn't want to disturb their peace, so I didn't tell them. At the end of that month, different things happened. A refund check came from a light deposit that we had somewhere. This arrived, that arrived. End of that month, without telling anybody anything, we paid all of our bills, bought the baby everything he needed. We never missed a meal. We bought all the gas we needed and had something like $40 left at the end of that month. I want to tell you something. The Lord will look after you if you'll give him a chance. He will look after you. He'll take care of you. All things work together for good to those who are the called according to his purpose, who trust him. Trust him, folks. You're every one called. Every single one of you are called. Called to him. Called to salvation. You have been elected to be saved. And he loves you. And he's going to be with you. I tell you, by the way, I built a good relationship with that radio station. It was called, I think the name of it was I used to remember the name of the broadcasting company. It became very big. The one that owned the Meriden station. They ended up, what was it called? TriStar, I believe is the name of it. And it also owned like Peanuts. They bought that while they were here. And when the conference called me to come up to be the conference evangelist, the way that happened, folks, is that nobody else would take it. That's the fact. They called Fortis Dedamore. He said, no thanks, I already held meetings in New England, and he wouldn't come. He wouldn't even come back to hold a meeting. And Fortis Dedamore is one of my heroes in life. They called evangelist after evangelist to come, and they all turned them down because of the difficulty. He called HMS Richards Jr. and said, would you give us a name? Somebody. He said, you got a guy right there in your conference. He says, he worked with me in that meeting. He's worked at other meetings, and says he's going to go somewhere. Somebody's going to call him as evangelist. You might as well call him as evangelist. And that's how I got the call. I was right after here, actually. I had gone out and first thought I was coming back here, and had gone to Andrews to finish up some summer work. By the way, that summer, I made up 1 quarter, 13 weeks bulletins ahead. They'd never had a bulletin in this particular church. I said, we're not stopping the bulletin. They said, Pastor, you don't need a bulletin. I said, we need a bulletin. Made them up ahead, made up the elder schedule, everything ahead. Even had a meeting that we had where we organized all of the young people's activities for the whole summer. At the end of the summer, I asked them, by the way, they said, none of this will go. I said, I believe every bit of it will. At the end of the summer, I asked them, were there any changes? They said, yeah, one. They said the hayride was rained out. We had to reschedule a hayride. But I said that could have happened if I'd have made the bulletin on Thursday. It still could have happened. But we made those bulletins ahead. But while I was out there, I got the word at General Conference 1966 that Southern New England Conference Committee had met, and they were calling me to be the conference evangelist. Dream of my young life at that time was to be an evangelist. Felt like I was probably too wild to be a pastor at that particular stage. And as I got older, that's different. I've slowed down so much I can be a pastor now. But in those days, I was a little too aggressive and needed to be a hit-and-run preacher. You know, a guy that gets in there for a month, tells everybody what to do, and then he's out of town and he doesn't have to work. In fact, sometimes I've even described myself as a drive-by preacher. Just get by there and then go on. But I want you to know that I really enjoyed being here. These people here helped me. This entire district, all three, Brother Wethy and Brother Lawson, and all of the different ones, the Tompkins family, and the Carpenters, and Tilly, bless her heart. I don't know if I'd have stayed longer, we might have killed each other, but I don't think so. But we did have an interesting time together. When I started to leave the radio station, the general manager of all their deal came to me and offered me the job as manager of the station in Meriden. I said, I don't know anything about running a radio station. He said, you didn't know anything about going on the radio when you came here. He said, we can teach you. He said, he thought y'all were firing me, and that's why that I was moving on. I said, no, the Lord's called me to do something else. I said, I really enjoy working with you guys, but truthfully, the Lord has called me to preach the word, and I have to do it. I've looked forward to doing it. In fact, I did it for 25 years without receiving any money. When they said work for $1 a year, that's right. They never even paid me the $1. And I used to tease them about that was growing with interest. But the Lord gave us the opportunity to work, have our own business, run it for 25 years, and to preach at the same time. And I want to tell you, those were glorious years for the Lord. He's done some good things. I didn't want to be a conference president, but he called me to be a conference president. For 7 years, I was a conference president. I didn't ask to go to the division as vice president, but the brethren asked me to go to the division as vice president. During that time, put me in charge of the media center. I thought, why? I'm in charge of the media center, chaired all those boards, was the president of the media center legally. In other words, if they send somebody to jail, it had been me. And I thought, why? And then when they asked me to continue at the division, I'd had 5 years there, I said, I think I'm going to go back to Texas, my home church in Dallas. Attendance was down to 35. I said, some of the members have asked me if would I come back. They say they're going to close the church if we don't, something doesn't happen. And so I accepted that call and went back there. And for 2 years, we worked hard, saw the Lord revive that church. What a wonderful thing that was. attendance went from 35 to over 300, which in that inner city situation was a blessing. We had some bigger Sabbaths than that, but that was our average attendance after 2 years. And then Danny Shelton came to town, and he told me, he said, "You are number 3 on the list to be president of 3ABN. Did you know that?" I said, "No, I didn't know you had a list. I didn't know I was on the list." And I said, "Who are the first 2?" And he told me. I said, "Well, I'll sleep well tonight, because either one of those are good guys, and either one will take it. I know them, and I know they'll take it." And the first one did take it, but he wanted to keep living in California and still be the president. And they said, "No, we can't do that." And then the second one, all of a sudden, they skipped him. And they called me. And I said, "What happened to number 2? They said, "Well, the board met again and skipped over number 2. And they've come to you." And we really had to do some praying. Real hard praying. But I want to tell you, there's been no question in our mind that God led us there. It has been very rewarding, very thrilling. We have really been blessed to be a part of that team. I want to tell you that when you really get close to 3ABN, you find out what a powerful ministry it really is. You realize how God has used Danny and how the devil has fought Danny, done everything he could to destroy him. But the Lord keeps picking him back up. And I tell him over and over again, "Danny, the Lord's not through with you. Your best days are ahead." Best days for him are ahead. 1.65 billion people around the world can just turn on their TVs without doing anything extra and pick up 3ABN. That does not count the 2 billion that could watch on the internet. The internet's growing with us so fast we can't even keep up with how many people are watching by the internet. The Lord is using 3ABN. We have 135 low-power stations. Some of them are in cities like Minneapolis, St. Louis, Las Vegas. Over 100 people a year are baptized from our little low-power station in Las Vegas. That's a documented figure. Over 100 per year. Mountain View Church, which is 900 members now, says that they baptize about 50, average of 50 a year. Paradise averages about 50. And Dr. Calvin Rock's church will baptize somewhere in the neighborhood of 20. So over 100 per year are baptized as a result, just right there in that one city. Little town where I grew up, Tyler, Texas, has a low power there. They tell me that they baptize about 20 every single year. People just walk in the door and say, "I've been watching 3ABN." So we know that it's working. We know that people are watching. Some people say, "Don't you just preach to Adventists?" Our viewing audience is less than 2% Adventist. Our giving is largely from Adventists, not completely by any means, but we do depend upon people that believe in the third angel's message to support that ministry, and they do. As I mentioned before, we don't have any big-time givers anymore. They've either died, and people that helped get it started, and or else the economy has really severely limited their ability to give. So it's the average giver, people that send $100 a month, $50 a month, $25 a month, whatever they can send. And that's what keeps us on the air. And it's a ministry of faith, totally a ministry of faith. I hope that you will look at that picture, DVD, Mending Broken People. In fact, maybe sometime you could show it for a couple of Vespers here or something and let the people see it. You got some nice screens, nice setup that you have here.